Welcome to Oh God, What Now, the politics podcast that is itself sadly too old to be conscripted, but thinks a spell of national service would do the bunker a lot of good. I'm Alex Andreou. On today's show, Rishi Sunak's big policy for the Genelec, a spell of natty Serbs. We dig through the rubble of what was once an actual political party. And why do politicians lie about trade? We talk to Dmitry Grozoubinski about his new book and what the next government should be doing about our relationship with the EU. Plus, we nominate our heroes and villains of the week. Right, first up today, it's comedian and self-interviewer Matt Green, whose first full comedy special is now on YouTube, and we have dropped a link to it in the show notes for you. Hello, Matt.
Hello.
Nigel Farage launched his campaign in Dover on Monday. He has also challenged Sunak to a TV debate, but he's published a letter saying he's not running because he wants to focus on the US election. So what is his actual locus here? I mean, is he talking as a sort of holy full share owner of the limited company that owns the party? I mean, what is his actual political status?
He's almost like an emeritus leader now. It's like he's kind of, he used to be the leader, but now...
Emeritus
yeah,
leader,
he's kind of, it's like the honorary president or something. Like they wheel him out. I think it's basically about getting him lots of coverage, and it is getting him a lot of coverage. He's always on the front pages at the moment, particularly the Telegraph, obviously. Can't get enough of him. It's like he's happy to do the big ticket items, the big speeches, but not that keen on doing the actual work of running. Although he did say in his speech that he would have run potentially if he'd had more time to do the data and stuff. But it was too soon. It was just too soon.
Yeah, just missed it. But on challenging the Prime Minister to a debate, I mean, what is his locus? I don't know. Can I challenge Sunak for a debate? I would like to challenge Sunak for a debate.
I think, get on Question Time a few more times and maybe you'll be okay. That's the thing. It feels... Yeah. He did say...
Is that the entry-level drug?
I think it is, yeah. I think they measure it up, and then once you've hit 30 appearances, you get an opportunity.
That's brilliant. Secondly, it's columnist and author Marie Leconte, back from her holidays.
Hello,
Marie. A leaked email from Conservative campaign headquarters saw them already blaming MPs and ministers for not campaigning enough and apparently concentrating too much on their ministerial duties.
Damn those people concentrating on their duties.
I know, right?
How dare they?
It also details that several people's local fighting funds are basically depleted. What is going on?
Well, I mean, and I suspect that's going to be a problem for the next 5 weeks. I'm just about to state the obvious for the next few minutes, and I'm very sorry about that.
No, listen, we are the podcast of stating the obvious.
No, I think, there's a lot, and I'm sure we'll come back on that later, there's a lot of fury, I think, among Tory benches. The Tory MPs I've spoken to have been apoplectic at Sunak, and it's still, I texted one earlier today being like, still angry? And they said, yes. Okay, cool. So I think, that they feel that they got completely taken by surprise. There's clearly no great plan either. It's not even the case of saying, well, listen, I couldn't tell you, I can let you in on it beforehand, but now it's been launched that we're going to do this and this and this and that, and and here's the money and here's the plan, etc. It's fair to say that's not what Rishi has done. So I can sort of see why there's no great enthusiasm. And also, to be blunt, a lot of them know they're going to lose anyway. So it's a bit, and I really sympathise with that. Because
I got that
I could fight, or I could just lie down on the ground.
So I got that vibe a little bit with the fighting fund stuff. That there was a sense like, why should I hit all my business contacts for $2,000 now instead for a job in a month's time, right?
I do think there's probably a wider problem with that, because I was considering doing a story on that before Rishi called the election, of like talking to MPs before last week. Several of them would say, I've been trying to fund, to fund the campaign for whenever it happens, and people don't really want to fund it. So that'd already been a problem kind of lying there, like at the back of politics. So I think, but also, again, if you're a Tory donor, just keep your money for now. Yeah. Like, it's a bit like, it's not going to do anything. And I'm sure some of them are rich enough to just throw bills into a well. But most of them probably aren't.
And finally, as mentioned in my intro, it's the author of Why Politicians Lie About Trade, Dmitry Grozoubinski. Hello, Dmitry.
Hello. It's so lovely to meet you and the rest of my Twitter feed inside this box.
Lovely to meet you. Might Sunak calling an early election be an indication that the economic recovery is going to be jagged rather than consistent, and that indicators right now are as good as they think things will get? Because we got a sense maybe with some people saying inflation might go back up next month, and the Bank of England might not cut interest rates next month, and so does that play into the decision?
I think it's important to separate what the economy is doing from what the vibes are doing.
Yeah.
I think this was, to the extent that there was a logic here, and that is being generous, as Marie explained. This is writing more of a plan into these people than there appears to be. It seems like there was this sense of the inflation numbers were a bit better than expected. There was a sense that the Bank of England announcement may be favorable. And it was like, well, if we go now, the vibes are never going to be better than this. Now, whether the actual economic indicators sort of trend consistently or jaggedly, I don't know. But to be very honest, looking at the comparison, the obvious comparison is the US, what the macroeconomic data is saying and how people perceive the economy are only tangentially related. And I think this was a sense of like, we're going to have a string of good headlines, let's just go, because who knows if we'll ever get this many good headlines again.
No, that's interesting what you say about the US, because I saw some very interesting polling which was asking people, how do you think the American economy is doing? And we're going, depending on their affiliation, actually, the Republicans thought the economy was doing horribly badly. But then if you ask them the question about their finances, if you thought your job security, your prospects for the future, they were all like big thumbs up. And it's like, hang on, matey. But that's where perception comes in, I guess. Welcome, Rishi Sunak, to Ogwen Air. The exits are clearly marked here, here, and here. We were going to devote the entire show to the express revelation that apparently women go weak in the knees at the sight of Richard Big Dicky Tice. That is an actual quote. But we realize that there are more important policy proposals to discuss. After calling the election from inside a fish tank, throwing journalists out of a press event, failing to organise quite literally a piss-up in a brewery, congratulating the Welsh for the England men's football team, doing a press conference where the Titanic was built, and being tackled by a very small cone, Rishi Sunak regained his footing by throwing a dart at a board of policy ideas generated by a malevolent, retired, AI-generated reform voter. After the announcement to bring back conscription was made, someone satirically tweeted, "If the Tories really want to play on my contempt for young people, they should introduce a quadruple lock." 3 hours later, the Telegraph broke the story. Marie, leaked internal memos, other than the one we just discussed, reveal that the Tory campaign is almost entirely focused on fending off reform. Can this possibly be a winning approach, or is the focus now simply on avoiding extinction?
I don't believe it's a winning approach. I think, in a way, it's probably the easiest one for Rishi Sunak, because the obvious thing to do should be, as an outsider, should be to gain back, people who used to vote for the Conservatives but are planning to vote for the Lib Dems or for Labour. But the problem is, I think the Conservative Party is in a kind of like doom loop, death spiral, whatever you want to call it, where so much of the kind of core membership, like all 7 of them, and so much of the Parliamentary Party is insane now. And the problem is, if you want to regain people who have gone over to the left, you probably have to tack towards, at the very least, the centre, and, and kind of get back to Cameroonism, get back to kind of, more centrist Tory kind of one nation-y stuff. But the problem is, if Rishi Sunak does that, he will probably get hanged by his own members of Parliament, as we saw with what's-her-face in Telford, Lucy Allen, deciding to back the Reform candidate. So I think him going for Reform is basically trying to say, I know I can't do anything else. That is the only option I can go for right now with the party that I have.
And quite weirdly, for his future job prospects, it's better to do sort of better than everyone expected. I mean...
Then yes.
Yeah. In national service was the most controversial one so far. How knee-jerk do you think it feels?
I don't know. I'm actually weirdly conflicted.
Oh, I can see it. It's going to be a controversial opinion.
Oh no, actually, no. That was going to be my very annoying. I'm quite conflicted because on the one hand and on the other hand, no. I think I've got the controversial thing coming later. It's fine. I've seen the script. No. So I'm slightly conflicted because I think any other politician that would have gone, this is a batshit idea. They got out at the last minute for no obvious reason, right? Fine. Rishi Sunak is a really weird politician with no instincts to speak of and like a really odd set of beliefs. And as a result, I think is genuinely unpredictable. So I think there's so much stuff, if you look at what he's done, what he believes in, etc., it's not a coherent policy platform at all. So, he's quite libertarian in some way, but obviously was the kind of like furlough chancellor. He also, the smoking ban thing is arguably not kind of libertarian at all, but then he's also very right-wing on some economic stuff, etc. So he's not someone, but in the way, and I think that's symptomatic of the fact that he didn't spend that much time in the Commons before like rising to ministerial level, then to cabinet level. Even before that was not even a massive political person, so he's not a kind of like big parliamentary beast in that sense. But yeah, all of this to say that maybe that's actually something he believes in. Like maybe, national service is for some reason one of the like four really random things picked out of a hat that he's really passionate about. Like they think, that's kind of my thing where, it feels with anyone else, I would have been like, this is knee-jerk, just trying to appeal to the Telegraph. With him, I'm like, maybe not. Like maybe that's again one of those things where for some reason he just feels strongly about that.
I'm not sure if you're being generous or ungenerous. I don't know which one is worse, basically. if he thinks that is an actual policy or military chiefs, Tory MPs, even ministers have trashed the proposal. I mean, it's part of the problem actually that everything from the election date to individual policies is just so tightly controlled from Number 10 and the pitch so poorly rolled that they take their own team by surprise. Everyone is like, what?
Yes, I will say, here it comes. In Number 10's slight defence, I do think there's such a massive problem now of trust within the parliamentary party, the parliamentary Tory party, that anything that gets said to anyone at any point gets leaked within seconds to someone. So I can sort of see if you're Number 10 going, well, we wish we could, and I think as David Cameron used to call it, bring people into Number 10 and make them dip their hands in the blood. Probably can't do that because they would do that and then while their hand is still in the blood, they would be with the other hand texting the Telegraph.
They would be writing a note with blood.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think, that part of the problem is not entirely on them in that they just cannot trust anyone around them, which is not ideal. But also the others are also
of the party, so he's kind of responsible for that side of things.
Well, he's kind of, he was brought into a zoo where there were no longer any cages, and I think he's just tried vaguely to be like, could you guys maybe could you go back into, and that didn't work. But
again, but Chancellor for Johnson for 3 years.
Oh yeah,
I think his hands are quite dipped. Yeah. To use that same metaphor.
But also
in something.
But that being said, they're still shit policies. And anyone could have told them that. So again, I'm only very partially giving them like a bit of something, but the rest is like also the policies are bad.
And also the way they've done it, which you can see how they thought they were clever. They're like, we're not going to announce the specifics. It's going to be a royal commission that will determine them all, which is... Like, I can see how you initially would go, that's clever, then no one... But instead, firstly, everyone gets to imagine their own worst version of this. And secondly, his poor ministers keep being asked on TV, like Anna Trevelyan being like, well, will parents be thrown in jail if their 18-year-old kids don't do this? And she's like, they might. It's like, well,
okay,
that's a new legal principle.
I can't rule it out, certainly. No.
But are you sure they didn't introduce there will be a commission after the initial reaction was like, what are you talking about?
I'm just glad they didn't say that they held all the cards when negotiating with the children.
Matt, how does this proposal for national service square with the violent reaction against Starmer giving 16-year-olds the vote?
Well, it's quite a contrast, isn't it? Because essentially on the same day, you've got Labour saying, let's get young people into polling booths, and the Tories saying, let's get young people into uniform. That's essentially what we've got. There was quite a nice quote from Liz Kendall, Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary, who said that the election should be about the country's future, not fighting for a better past, which I thought was quite a good way of putting it. But that's what it is. I mean, I saw someone describe it on social media as a policy aimed at young people in a sort of positive, saying, but at least it's a policy aimed at young people. And I thought, no, that's exactly it. It's aimed at young people. It's not about them or for them or on their behalf. It's like a weapon, a projectile being fired at young people for the benefit of mostly older people who don't like young people.
Yes, I think that is where any kind intentions about the policy, I think, fall apart.
Yeah.
In that it's clearly not aimed at young people.
Yeah.
It is aimed at older voters who think young people have had it too good or whatever.
Yeah, and I think coming on the same day as the 16-year-old voting thing was so stark.
It really was,
The fact that... And immediately all the kind of outriders in the press were sort of saying, well, 16-year-olds don't know anything, why would they vote? And you think, you can't really go down that road too far, because there are plenty of people who are older who don't know anything about politics. But we don't have a test of aptitude for democracy in this country. So why should 16-year-olds have to pass some sort of test as well? So it feels like there's a dangerous game they're playing, saying 16-year-olds aren't competent, because then you can start going, what about 88-year-olds? Are they competent?
I like very much a comment I saw about Schrodinger's teenagers who are simultaneously roaming the streets of London with machetes, robbing everyone, and are also far too soft to do anything other than have avocado on toast.
Hey, these were my teenage years, to be honest.
Yes. You need a big knife for an avocado, that's the thing.
But many Western countries have compulsory national service. Why shouldn't Britain?
Well, I'm going to do the same thing that Marie nearly did, of going, maybe it's not a bad idea, because I don't think it is necessarily as a thing a bad idea. In fact, William Hague's got quite a good piece in the Times today, which made the point that Labour shouldn't rule it out completely as an idea forever, because actually there are lots of reasons why it could be potentially useful. Even the military side of it, which a lot of people have been attacking, the idea that we do ideally need a few more trained people, because you never know, in 10 years' time, the world could look quite different, could be quite a dangerous place.
Someone that's done a year at age 18 is not trained at age even 25.
No, but that's the point. That's the point he's making, I think, or the point I would make, is that it only works if you do it as a sort of consistent thing, that you make people part of a system, rather than just going, have a few weeks of training and then that's it, you're done forever. But I think in principle, the idea of there being some way in which people can come together and volunteer and all that stuff. But my first thought on it, when I read about it, was I think we need that for everybody. Like, there needs to be more opportunities for everybody to volunteer.
Yes, opportunities though, rather than I mean,
compulsory.
You can't make people volunteer.
No,
the entire thing is,
and you can't force people to have pride in a country that doesn't seem to care about them.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who comes from a country with compulsory national service, I can tell you that the actual effect is entirely the opposite.
I'm sure
it doesn't bring people together. It does completely the opposite. It creates a sort of low-level corruption that runs through the entire country, because everyone uses any contact they have in government, any cousin, anyone, any bribe they can give to a local official to make sure their kid gets the best placement possible. And so the poorest working class people end up guarding some frontier.
Yeah.
And the richest, best connected kids end up doing some program where they clean, sea turtles on Mykonos, and they call that national service. That's what happens in practice.
Yeah.
There's no mixing.
I sort of feel like I would have no confidence they would do it. They would obviously outsource it to some sort of private company, and you'd end up with like loads of teenagers being bussed to the middle of nowhere, and they get to make dodgy PPE or something.
Would you like to hear a Marie fun fact which is related to the conversation?
Yes, please do.
No, so there's actually, you do have to do national service in France, which is precisely one day, which is really weird. So it's one day where apparently you sit in a room and you watch a PowerPoint about the army, and then you eat chicken and chips for lunch. But anyway, I did not do it because I moved here at 17, and also I didn't want to, which means that apparently I can't get a driver's license in France or become a civil servant.
Yeah, well, there you go.
I thought that was reasonably fun. That's like 7 out of 10 fun.
And a great loss to the French civil service.
National service is a small price to pay to keep her
off French roads.
Even for a day. Piled on top of that, Monday as we record, the big announcement is that the triple lock is now a quadruple lock. I mean, does this just compound the generational unfairness? They don't give a shit, do they?
I think, why stop there? Let's go further. Quintuple lock, sextuple lock, septuple
jokes.
lock.
I told you what happened. Someone said it on Twitter.
I know.
It came true. So what are your crazy policies?
well, all I'll say is that I did a video about national service being a thing because there was a report on it, a few months ago, and then that's now a thing. So all I'm saying is I have power. I think surely they've got other ideas. Maybe they'll give pensioners the right to kick young people off tables in restaurants. I don't know. Get to the front of the queue at shops. Maybe the purge, but just for pensioners. It feels like it's just all of these things are designed simply, as you said, for their kind of core base vote. And young people are literally the target.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of in a weird place emotionally where I hope the dial shifts a couple of points, not enough to make a massive difference, but enough to stop them going more and more insane, basically. However mad their future plans are, talking about those is better for them than talking about their actual records. So have these announcements actually been very successful in that sense? Because they would rather be talking about this than the economy or the NHS waiting list, right?
Maybe, but I think I've been thinking a lot about sort of what I would be doing if I was Rishi Sunak's team. And I think the perception that they have to deal with, the negative perception, is yes, the incompetence, but also the sense that they are flailing, unpredictable, and pandering endlessly to the insane fringe, to do what Marie was talking about and try to win back some of those sort of traditional Tory voters who don't want to see their kids in an army uniform. So this kind of thing, yes, they're talking about the future, but it's in the exact... Firstly, it doesn't match Rishi Sunak's vibes, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Rishi Sunak codes like a nerdy technocrat. Whether that's fair or not, if I was his team, it would be like him looking at spreadsheets and him listening to people and hearing about their problems. Instead, you've got him out here doing all this weird stuff and doing these flailing policies.
And they're laughing. That needs
to...
What is happening? Have they told him to just laugh a lot?
I don't understand.
Because he doesn't look like he's enjoying himself either when he's laughing. Like one of those weird animals who just get...
It's very
It's just nervous laughter, isn't it? It's that kind of nervous laughter which people...
Yeah. Well, so that, and I think, are they telling the kind of story about who they are that they want to tell with this kind of thing? And I don't believe they are.
Marie, part of the separating line that Tories have been highlighting vigorously, really, for years, is big state paternalism under Labour versus small state liberalism under the Tories. And then they come up with a proposal like national service. How do people pivot to that on the doorstep?
I'm actually not convinced. I think the vast majority of Tories like saying that they're libertarians, but they're not libertarians at all. And I see no exception here. I think they're just saying, oh yes, we just want a tiny little state, but then also we'll announce stuff that's a bit like, well, you need a big state to do that. So how do you square that one?
I mean, I thought it was very interesting that Trump got booed at the Libertarian conference in the US the other way. It seems to me like that conflict between libertarian rhetoric and actually quite authoritarian policies is beginning to bubble up to the surface a little bit. Sort of worldwide, where people like this, promise liberty but deliver compulsion.
Well, I think, is it that, people are realising, maybe especially after the pandemic, that it's just not a coherent policy platform, but also I think, proper libertarians, when they really talk about the extent to which they want everything to be libertarian coded, usually make normal people run away.
Matt, of the 66 constituencies Sunak has visited this year, 56 are Tory held.
Yeah.
I find that quite interesting. Yesterday, Sunak, Starmer, Davey were all in the so-called blue wall. The SNP is targeting Scottish Tory seats, really quite explicitly. Reform seems entirely preoccupied with Sunak. I haven't heard Tice say Starmageddon for months now. I mean, are we seeing a loose, tacit, everyone pile on the Tories sort of non-aggression pact?
I mean, I think possibly, yeah. I mean, it has been interesting. You talked about how the National Service has sort of dominated the headlines for a bit, and it does feel like the coverage is really focusing on the Tories, on Sunak, in a way that I don't think is helpful for them, because it's just being very gaff. It's very gaff driven. Feels like Starmer just is this sort of quite stable centre of this, and the idea that Labour was going to have to come out with these big proposals feels almost like maybe they don't. Maybe they can just get away with watching Sunak slowly self-detonate, which seems to be what's happening. I've just literally, just on Twitter as we were discussing polling and whether it's going to go up and down, the latest Survation poll has the Labour lead go up. So
yeah,
just now.
Can you check out Redfield and Wilton as well? They will have been out in the last 10 minutes too, so we can see what that is doing live on the air. How exciting. Dmitry, Labour have spent the last 3 days talking about the economy. Is there a danger for Sunak that outside debate about this or that policy, the sort of item-specific noise, the larger picture that goes to voters is that Labour are the adults in the room talking about the actual top priority of everyone in every election, which is the economy, while the Conservatives are all about special niche interests?
I think the problem with that framing, which is how it would absolutely work in a fair and just universe, is that if you look at what breaks through in the media, if you've got one party that is announcing gigantic, poorly thought out, gaff-prone national mobilization schemes, and the other party is sort of like, we want to talk about checkbook issues and, we're going to make smart 15-year investments in rail infrastructure, the coverage is by necessity going to be focused on the insanity. And so the insanity could hurt, well, and I think it will, as we just saw in that poll, could hurt the Tories. But what's going to help the Labour Party is just not also being insane next to them, rather than they're going to say about the economy is going to break through.
I see what you mean. So the important thing is that they're not taking the bait rather than the juxtaposition of the image.
Exactly. And so there's an Australian counterexample, which is in the election that, not the previous one, the one before that. Yeah. Our version of the Labour Party blew a initially commanding lead by announcing a bunch of sweeping policies before the election, because they were confident they would win and they wanted a mandate to roll them out. And then they got buried in the most nitpicky minutiae of fracking credits. There's an election fought on fracking credits, which, and I say this as a trade guy, sounds awful. I'm not unaware of the irony, but
And we go back to our polling desk for the latest Redfield Wilton.
So Redfield Wilton literally breaking hot off the Twitters. The largest ever lead for Starmer over Sunak. Keir Starmer 45%, Sunak 26%, down 4.
And it was quite a mega poll, wasn't it? It was
poll.
Something like 11,000 sample, which is
let me just
huge
check.
For a sort of non-MRP.
Yes, 12,000 respondents across Britain. So
dear.
It's not looking great.
It's not looking great, is it? Marie, we have seen even more prominent Tories stepping down since the election was announced, Gove and Leadsom being the most notable recent example. Is there anyone left that can provide the country with its cathartic Portillo moment? I know you went around for it, but you're a Politico, you know about it.
I do. I'm just really, really hoping for Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Yes, I think Rees-Mogg is like, yeah.
I think that's the one, because I considered compiling a list of all the big ones left, but actually I don't really care. I just really want to watch Jacob Rees-Mogg lose his seat.
And have to make a speech like sort of Mr. Peanut.
He will, yeah. And it's going to be very enjoyable to watch, I think. And especially because he is in such a Tory patch, and it's a bit low. And it's not clear to me what he's going to do after that as well. So no, I would say that that's my one I'm really looking forward to, I think.
I think he will install a diving board over his pile of money, like Scrooge McDuck.
I'll just go back to GB News, sadly. Probably.
Yeah, raising his 11 children.
Matt, final question for you. We have seen CCHQ actually lean into the sort of disastrous launch in the rain. Their main campaign video ends on the image of a drenched Sunak walking into Downing Street, while the voiceover explains he will not do the easy thing, but what is right for the country. Okay, listen. I'm the sort of person that checks the weather app before I put the laundry out to dry, as I think most people do. But Brits love an underdog, right? Is there a punishment strategy when you're riding that low in the polls actually quite smart? Might people actually start to feel sorry for you?
I mean, it's a terrifying possibility. I mean, I think probably not. I don't think you can project sort of strength and boldness and preparedness and I've got a plan and I'm about the future and also be the underdog. I think you could do the look. I inherited this mess and I'm doing the best I bloody can, but it's a tough one. But he's not doing that. He's not talking about there was a mess and I'm dealing with it. He's sort of saying everything's great and it's going to get even better. And just when I thought about this, I thought we do love an underdog in Britain. That's true. I mean, people love, Frank Spencer from Some Others Who Haven't. No one would vote for him. It's not like, that we love underdogs in our sports or in our sitcoms. We don't want to vote for them.
Last thing, whole panel. Quick fire round, 1 week in. What is your favourite campaign gaff so far?
Welsh football for me. It was the first one, but I think it was just really neat.
I really enjoyed the one that I saw this morning of him doing a speech with his back to the camera again, because it reminded me of that GB News forum, leaders forum from last year, where they just were constantly focusing on his back, and it feels like there's something subliminal going on about we're going to see the back of him or something. I don't know quite what's going on there. But
and none of the people asking questions in shot.
Well,
literally, you could see his back. You could see some really bored teenagers in the background looking at their phone.
Yeah. I haven't seen a single photo yet where there's been Rishi Sunak and anyone smiling behind him. It's just constantly like baleful glares.
How about you, Dmitry?
I have to say it's that footage of, I think it was Albania, covered in British flags as the person they are welcoming sort of just turns around on their jet and flies away. It's like a pre-election gaff, but it was...
I mean, my favourite one was the one around the Titanic thing, but not because it got swallowed up by the Titanic thing, but the story adjacent to that came out in the Belfast Telegraph is that they sent them to the wrong place twice before so all the journalists were sent to a location, there was no one there, and then got WhatsApp saying, oh no, sorry, we gave you the wrong location, and they ended up going to a car park, again with no one there. And that's where the Titanic thing happened. They kind of split the difference and they went, okay, just say where you are and we'll do it next to the river.
Was Four Seasons landscaping not available?
And
I just love the story of that because, famously, the press love to be jerked around.
And they clearly were doing it just because of the TikTok he was making, where he was like, I'm in England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and that's all it was.
The TikTok, don't get me started on the TikTok. It's literally like someone who has just read a description of TikTok on Wikipedia. Next up, time to choose our hero and villain of the week. Who has secured promotion to our Premier League and who wins this week's Ballon d'Or? Matt.
Well, weirdly, both of them have already been mentioned today, so I'll do them quickly. My hero, so this is tongue-in-cheek, because I don't think they are my heroes, really, but is the Libertarian Party delegates who booed Trump, because I just think anybody who gets a chance to, in person, have a go at Trump is a hero in my book. It has to be said.
And villain?
Villain would be all of the Tory MPs who have not given us the chance to watch them on election night. And we've already mentioned a few of them, but there are so many. Gove, Leadsom, Redwood, Hancock, May, Zahawi, Wallace, Walker. There are loads, and every one of them have just we want to see the moment. We want to see the moment. You owe us that.
Cry in a sports centre at 3 a.m.
Yeah.
I dumped you first.
Exactly.
How about you, Mary?
My hero is Harriet Harman, given that she's standing down at the election, released her letter today. I think she was just an amazing parliamentarian. The Equality Act of 2010 was one of the kind of big pieces of legislation she brought forward, but also I think she really brought, like, one of the women who brought Westminster kicking and screaming into the, 20th probably century on feminism and gender stuff. I think that's a very well-deserved retirement. And my villain is kind of a two-part one, in that it's Nigel Farage in general for just making absolutely abhorrent comments again and again over the past week against Muslims, against immigrants, etc. But also kind of more generally about the people who enable him, because as we've been talking about earlier, he's not standing as a member of parliament.
He's nothing.
He's not even the leader of the Reform Party. Now, why? Why let Richard Tice? Fine, I hate his views as well, but he's the leader of a party. Fine, have him on the telly. There is no reason to have Nigel Farage everywhere in the press, and that really infuriates me.
Yeah. How about you, Dmitry?
I think my hero has to be Steve Baker, who, looking at this election, went, I'm going on holiday. And I respect that as just a, don't want to be anywhere near this. I'll be on the beach in Greece. That's it, I'm out. My villain, and the backstory to this is that, setting aside politics, I suffer from intense vicarious cringe.
Okay.
I cannot watch Peep Show because every muscle in my body seizes up uncontrollably. And so my villain is whoever it is that is running Rishi Sunak's campaign and planning everyone. It feels like an attack on me personally. Every time they drag that poor nerd onto a soccer pitch and film him tripping over his own feet, I feel
Why
attacked.
is he still there, man? He's got so much money. I mean, the instinct in me to just disappear in the middle of the night.
Yeah, call a 1 week campaign and then just be like, done.
But also just we don't know where he is. We can't find him. And he's on a private island going, money.
Just campaigns on Zoom, like a yacht.
Yeah, does TikTok videos from his private island. Why not? Okay, so Hero of the Week, I think, has to go to Harriet Harman. I mean...
She's just great.
Bloody hell. And Villain of the Week, I'm going to have to give it to the Gove... Leadsom conglomerate of people who are denying us of the opportunity to actually kick them out. I'm sorry, Dmitry. I should be more gracious to our guest. Trade talks have been a key feature for post-Brexit Britain, with our efforts since leaving the EU having been unimpressive, let's say generously. But listen to a raft of Tory MPs and they'll tell you the opposite. And honestly, who in the general public is going to have time to truly fact-check them on calling a meaningless memorandum of understanding with a US state a trade deal worth that entire state's economy? Well, not all heroes wear capes. Our guest today, Dmitry Grozoubinski, from whom you've already heard, spends his time doing just that, fact-checking, challenging, and informing. His new book, Why Politicians Lie About Trade and What You Need to Know About It, is out now and is not just informative, but actually and surprisingly really quite funny. Dmitry, you write that the book's aim is to arm the reader against deception. Give me 2 or 3 recent examples of things said about trade that you consider just particularly egregious examples of deceiving people.
Sure. Well, you've already listed the memorandums of understanding worth the entire GDP of Idaho, which is a novel way to do that calculation.
Did we just buy Idaho? What is it you're saying?
Not just Idaho, all economic activity in Idaho for the entire year. Every haircut bought is going straight to the treasury. Now. Yes, which is, history is circular, so don't dump tea in the harbor. I think another one is the US announced a suite of tariffs, so border taxes on electric vehicles. And when asked sort of what will the impact of that be, they said, we found that tariffs have no link to consumer prices. And it's like, well, if you charge cars coming into the country a 100% tariff, they're probably going to get more expensive. Like, I'm not a math wizard, but I'm pretty sure that's not right. And again, it's as an attempt, in all of these cases, it's either an attempt to misrepresent what really quite minor changes will mean for ordinary people, which is actually the more harmless of the two, or it's to present these really big choices facing governments as not being choices at all, as having no downsides, as being just slam dunks.
So and that's play up the nonsense and play down the
consequence.
Yeah, consequences. It felt like to me, you move from a place of grouchiness, let me call it, with recent choices on trade. Would you be as vociferous if the government were making the right choices? Isn't it easier for a government that knows what it's doing to get on with it without people being very interested but half informed?
I think I would certainly, my blood pressure would be lower if I felt like the policy were being. It's not. What I try to do in the book and what I hope I try to do on Twitter is it's not even that individual policies bother me.
Yeah.
You can do what you like. I'm burnt out. Everybody just do whatever they want on policy. Like,
just
whatever.
Just do it.
That's a new title for this podcast. Just do what you like.
Fine. Fine. Back next week. So for me, it's like just communicate honestly about the choices being made. And let people understand what you hope to achieve, what you hope to prevent, and what success looks like. And as long as you're doing that in your policies, I don't get too worked up about a government doing one set of policies or another. I get shaky when I feel like people are being deceived.
So it's like, give us something measurable ahead of time, basically, so we know what you're going for.
That's right. What would success look like?
Yeah. You have a section entitled "There Are Always Losers," in which you posit that if a politician says a deal is a win-win, it should set off alarms. But in my rudimentary trade negotiation training, admittedly, I was taught the opposite. Like, I think the very first scenario, the very first day of the training, was about two companies vying for the same fruit that there are shortages of, and the price is going up. And it turned out that actually if you communicated enough, you found out that you need the pulp and they need the skin. So there was actually a synergy to be struck if you were clear in what you were looking for. I mean, what do you think of it? Isn't the fact that everyone came out of Brexit losing proof that membership was a win-win, actually, that there are trade deals that are good for everyone?
I don't think it's necessarily fair to say that absolutely everyone came out of Brexit losing. I think there were certainly individual companies that benefited from Brexit. Many of them were in the European Union and suddenly found that they no longer have UK competition. If you were certain kinds of firms, if you're a banker who suddenly finds that they get their bankers' bonuses back, as I think the UK brought back recently, you might be looking at Brexit going, not too bad. If you are New York, which a lot of those finance services jobs went to, you benefited from Brexit.
Or if you're a customs agent that does the paperwork, then positively.
I feel like if you're Dmitry as well, people care about care suddenly.
Oh my God! Like, Brexit was phenomenal for nerdy trade experts in Switzerland. If that was what the British public were aiming to do, thank you. Keep doing it again once every 6 months. I'm down.
I think as a political podcast, we're on thin ice.
It was. So from that perspective, there are winners and losers. Even in that sort of pulp example, one thing to always remember is that a lot of these economic models and abstractions we think about people as interchangeable economic units of like, I have lost my job at the steel mill. Well, I shall go and do something that my economy now has an advantage in. But is a 57-year-old steel worker going to suddenly write code to update Amazon's front end?
I'm going to say no. And I'm not. It's not impossible, but I'm going to say generally.
The lift would be incredibly high, in part because Amazon's not going to be that excited about somebody with that resume. So often, like the losers, it's maybe they could be winners in some abstract economic way, but in practice, they've had to sacrifice some of what they want or some of their interests.
You make a compelling argument for why negotiations are better when they are largely secret. Well, at least I found it compelling, but you're a former technocrat like me. We'd love to do everything in secret, to be honest. How do you balance that with accountability?
I think ultimately you have to have accountability for the results. The line I try to draw is it would not be helpful to have people watching us in the room as we do the actual negotiations. In part because I cannot tell you how boring it is. Watching 6 grown adults argue about the implications of a comma placement for like 12 consecutive hours is not West Wing Sorkin-esque sort of governance. I promise you're not missing out. But so from that perspective, I think some level of secrecy in order to give negotiators the opportunity to experiment, to put things on the table that outside of context would be perhaps unpalatable, but in the context could be useful. I think where accountability comes in is, again, kind of at the start, where it's like, what are you hoping to achieve out of this? What are you hoping to gain? What are your values that you're pushing through this deal? And ideally at the end, and that's where I think at the moment most of our systems really fall down. Yeah. Because by the time a free trade agreement is at the point where we're publishing the entire text and saying it's often after the signature. And so the opportunity to enable it, to scrutinize it, it's basically gone. Basically.
So, I'd call that the Barnier model in some ways. I thought that was, not everything went brilliantly, but I thought as a structure, the idea of having a very public brief at the start that says, this is your mandate, this is what you're trying to do, we want things in this order, we want the Ireland thing to take precedent, we want the finances to be separated first, and we want you to do trade deal with no cherry picking, these are the important things to us, then largely went away and then came back with a deal that was voted on, as it were. Is that quite a decent way of doing it, as it were?
It's a good way of doing it if you're operating from a position of strength, as the EU were, because
I don't know what you mean, man. We held all the cards.
Yes, but you were holding them facing the European Union, and they were from Pokemon. I think if you're pretty sure you're going to get almost everything that's in your mandate that you release, then it's a good position, because even in the room you can say, well, you've seen our mandate, you know what we're. The challenge is if you anticipate the deal being much more like half of what you want and half of what they want, it becomes harder to back off something that you have at the start been really specific about in saying these are my interests.
Isn't that what happened with David Cameron a bit? Pre-Brexit, he said, "Here are my red lines," and then didn't get really anything.
And everyone went, "Okay, that's nice for you."
Yeah.
How much do trade deals actually matter? Because I feel like since Brexit, we've heard so much about trade deals, but it's not clear to me just how much, they matter between countries or regions, etc.
Trade deal is a big category, but the short answer is the Brexit deal or the continuity agreement mattered like infinitely more than the average trade agreement normally does.
Okay.
Trade agreements generally happen between countries that have already liberalized trade as much as they were keen to, and then they incrementally improve trade a bit. What tends to matter is regional integration projects. So NAFTA, the European single market, where you make it easier not just to sell stuff to each other, but to make stuff together by making the borders less faffy, because that lets you combine your strengths. So those tend to matter more than like a free trade deal with India.
Cool. Yeah. I cared about that. That was interesting. Thank you.
There are 340 more pages of that.
It's very good, you see. Matt, what's your one thing?
Okay, so this is maybe slightly philosophical. Is there a problem with the word trade? Because it's such a simple word, and we all know what that word means in simple terms. I'm trading you for this. Do you think that's part of why trade deals aren't really understood by people? Because they think, well, that's just... That like it's quite hard to get people interested in something that they think is already quite simple. I don't know if I expressed that very well, but like you said in your book, you said that the trade community is famously bad at naming things, and I wonder if there's maybe a better way of talking about trade.
I mean, half the time when we're talking about trade, we're not even talking about trade. We're talking about what's called trade policy, which is already at a level of abstraction. It's like the rules about what governments can make the rules of trade be. And I have fallen asleep halfway through that sentence and I wrote a book about it. So yeah, I think absolutely we need to find a language that works better. But I do think inevitably the only way you are ever going to get the public to care about trade is by very clearly explaining its relevance to the things that they do actually care about. Yeah. People care about climate change, they care about jobs, they care about national security. So if you try to confine the conversation exclusively to trade, a combination of people thinking it's not that complicated and just the fact that they couldn't give a damn is always going to get you kind of glazed expressions. But when you say, when you talk people through, these are the choices we're going to have to make around carbon and how the way that we price carbon here will interact with factories overseas, people will begin to see the intuitive ways that is complicated and sort of interesting or at least relevant. Yeah. I think that's the best we can do.
Now, looking forward, does Labour have the right approach, generally speaking, to repairing relations with Europe? I mean, some say it's far too cautious.
So it's a really interesting question. One of the things is I think the transition won't be as sharp. If Starmer were replacing Johnson, for example, you would say that the difference in approach between the two of them would be so stark, just not treating anything with the EU anywhere near it as a target. To go from that to just being sort of normal would be a massive sea change. I think from where Labour's perspective is at the moment pre-election is by just trying to make themselves as small a target as possible and therefore not saying anything that might lend any salience to the inevitable drumbeat of they are going to reverse Brexit. Or at least they're going to make you think about Brexit again, which for the average UK voter is so much more horrifying. So once they are in power, I think they will discover that there are limits to what you can do with the European Union without talking about genuine integration and rejoining, which is probably unthinkable, at least in the next term. So they'll be able to think around
for the Europeans.
For the Europeans,
because a lot of this debate assumes that all Labour need do is announce that they plan to rejoin the single market and the EU would sort of jump for joy. And it's just not the case. It would be a really bad thing. It would kind of confirm the unilateralism and exceptionalism that they've come to truly loathe about the Brits.
But even beyond that, I mean, the most important signal we can send economically is stability and predictability. Businesses don't care about trade barriers nearly as much as they care about instability and stuff changing. If there's a sense of Labour's going to get us 3/4 of the way into the single market, but that will last until the first Tory government, which from day one will be saying in all of their things, we will disentangle us again. If you are thinking about investing in the European Union or the UK, you're I can't work with this. I have no idea what you're doing. And the EU's looking at that and going, I think my personal view, and please don't throw things, is that there will not be a serious rejoin conversation from the EU's perspective until that they see that neither UK party will immediately run on.
Oh, I'm not going to throw things at you. That's entirely my view.
I will.
No, I've said that it's actually the Conservatives that will first propose it. Will be part of their rehabilitation into a sane party in sort of 6-7 years' time. That they will suggest we need
and just
to rejoin.
Politically, from in Australia, it was the Conservatives who got rid of guns. Because when they announced that and the opposition went, cool, there was no one.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They didn't expose their flying to.
Two very quick final questions. There's all those carryover cut and paste post-Brexit trade deals. Most of them have a time limit, and we saw from the Canadian one that renewal is by no means a sort of automatic guarantee. If Labour come into power, are they going to inherit like a nightmare of transitional arrangements that are about to run out?
They will inherit some time bombs. A lot of these it's not like the entire free trade agreement dissolves, but what happens is, gets really technical, but basically your UK's ability to use EU parts and still qualify for a trade deal with another party. So this is happening with South Korea, for example. So that kind of time bomb. The Canadian sort of elements of the Canadian one. So they will inherit some of these, and these will be hard to address. But I will say that those expiring would not be, they will have negative impacts on very, very small segments of society. But even if every single one of those time bombs were to lapse, I think the average British voter may not feel it. And there is plenty of scope, because the other parties don't want that disruption either. There is plenty of scope to get around the table and repair some of these before the clocks run out.
Yeah. Okay. If you could wave a magic wand and get Labour to implement one trade aspect of trade policy, like lowest hanging fruit that will make the biggest difference in the first 100 days, what will it be?
Liberalize the hell out of visas. Do it right now. Okay. Do it right now. Brain drain China of all the people, the really smart people who can't go to the US but really want to go to the West. Attract workers for the NHS, attract workers for care, bring in smart, talented entrepreneurs. It'll fix like half the sectors in the economy, and then do the other policies then.
We've reached the end of the show, so it's time for Escape Routes. Has anything been distracting us from wall-to-wall political coverage this week? Can anything distract us? Matt, let's start with you.
I've been really enjoying Fallout on Prime. I haven't quite finished it yet, so no spoilers, but it's great. And
so good.
A really fun sort of comparison piece to The Last of Us. Much more kind of crazy and interesting and a bit wacky. And
I don't know that it's more interesting. Take that back. Marie, how about you?
Oh God, I've got two, and they're both just quite pretentious, so I'm very sorry in advance.
All right.
Movie, I went to see La Chimera, the Italian English movie where Josh O'Connor plays this English archaeologist who's in Tuscany in the 80s and is kind of part of this ancient grave robber gang. It's a very weird, it's a really hard movie to talk about because it's kind of lots of things at the same time, but it's incredibly charming.
To talk about it.
No, on the way here, I was like, how do I describe it? I'm not sure. It's very charming, quite sad, really beautifully filmed. So yeah, would really recommend. And the other thing is I've been reading, so Stefan Zweig did a series of very long essays on looking at the way that people wrote memoirs. So there's the one I'm reading at the moment is the one on Casanova, Stendhal and Tolstoy. And it's amazing. It sounds quite dry, but it's actually really, really interesting, especially the Casanova one I adore, because it's kind of looking at both his life, but also then the way he chose to portray his life and stuff. And and again, I kind of picked it up basically trying to impress someone. But it turns out I'm genuinely enjoying it.
Gorgeous. How about you, Dmitry?
To follow up the pretentious tirade of unpronounceable things from Murray, no, I have thrown myself back into the world of Baldur's Gate 3, a truly epic masterpiece of a game.
Is it still turn-based? That's all I want to know.
It is still pausable.
Is it hexagon?
No.
Oh no, I can't. No, sorry. No, I want hexagon turn-based to come back. As a format. It was my favorite thing. You could plan everything entirely out and then press the button and it just did everything.
Oh, Mario Rabbids does that. Okay. So yeah, and it's really fun.
All right.
If you want to play that.
Well, so Baldur's Gate.
Baldur's Gate has been my escape. It is like this masterfully crafted world that I can lose myself in. And even though it's largely ending in the game, it's still somehow more cheery than my Twitter feed. So
okay, and mine is very, very quick and easy. I have fallen down a Disney Plus rabbit hole, and I am rewatching the whole of the Golden Girls from the start.
Wow.
And actually amazing. So little of it is offensive or out of date that you would think quite a lot of it would be. But because it's done with such good humor and such, it never kind of punches down, and it's always quite caring about the people it involves. And so it gets away with an enormous amount that other shows of that era would be unwatchable now. Or even 10 years later, like the gay panic stuff in Friends is unwatchable now.
Yeah.
But Golden Girls, they do, what an extraordinary thing, they do episodes about the menopause and homelessness and the HIV epidemic, and it was just an extraordinary thing for
the
its
episode
time.
where they introduced national service and the quadruple lock, because we had one of those.
You jest. And that's the end of the Tuesday edition of Oh God, What Now? Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marie.
Thank you.
And thanks to our guest, Dmitry.
Thank you so much.
Oh God, What Now? We'll be back on Thursday for our backers and Friday morning for everyone else. Thank you so much for listening. Do support us if you can on Patreon, and see you next time.